So, Byron, the DA difference, my friend, they keep shooting themselves in the foot because in the city of Johannesburg, which is a DA led coalition, and they proudly state it's a DA led coalition, they decided to do something that is going to have a huge impact on schools in Johannesburg. Namely, they've changed the designation of schools from public interest organizations to businesses. And therefore, because now schools, independent schools, private schools, are businesses, rates are increasing eightfold for private schools in Johannesburg. It's, you know, the DA, man, come on. Like, what the hell are they doing here?
Hmm. This is an interesting thing because you can't kind of look at it as an isolated thing. I mean, obviously, at the moment, there's the education reform bill going through, which, in theory, is the government seeking to kind of almost do away with private schools. They don't really want private schools because, specifically during lockdown, the number of people that exited state schools into private schools is quite a lot, and they're saying that it's obviously had an impact on funding. So I suppose with that being said, you can kind of see that there's a lot of kind of pressure going on at the moment around private schools. Um, but then you also kind of have to look at some of the other things that have happened now with the DA. Obviously, we know that in some of the Johannesburg regions where um, the DA have come in, they've got rid of some of the free subsidies for electricity and for water, and that's obviously led to massive protests, which we've seen recently. So I think the problem is, and we spoke about this before, the DA always has a problem when it comes into governance. The first thing is it wants to be proactive with governance. It wants to do the right things. But the first thing they realize is that they're going to have money.
Yeah.
But the DA understands something that the ANC doesn't, and that is government can't generate money. It can't create money. It gets its money through taxation. That's how governments get their cash. They don't actually create money. They can't. They're not a business. They're not an enterprise. They're a public service. And as a public service, they get it from tax. So the DA needs money, but there isn't any. So we've seen this in majority of the DA kind of places. Even Cape Town had this problem. Remember when they had all the droughts and they were getting to day zero, the DA hiked the bill for water, and it was that money that allowed them to kind of repair infrastructure to repair the place. So, I can see that this is something that's now going on now in the Johannesburg region. They need money, so they're going to have to increase taxation in order to get that money, in order to be able to fix infrastructure.
Yeah. So,
The problem, I suppose, comes in is that there's nothing more permanent than a temporary measure. So
yeah.
it's like, and Cape Town will tell you this as well. It's the number one gripe people have with the DA in Cape Town is that when that water rate went up, it never came down. Even after the dams were overflowing, the water rate remained high.
Yeah, so,
So
so
it's
so
this,
you and I have a bit of sympathy with this position, right? You live in a DA controlled
mm,
area. I now live in a
yeah,
DA controlled area in Joburg. We know that these places, these areas, these metropolitans or municipalities, when DA comes in, when they win, there is no money, right? Service delivery
mm,
cannot happen during the first 5 years of DA governance because
100%.
there's just no money for anything. There's outstanding
Mm,
invoices, people going on strike, the useless state catered deployed people are still messing about. So it's really 5 years of consolidation. And if the DA wins again, then they can finally do some sort of service delivery because there's hopefully a surplus of money. But during that
mm,
original 5 year period, they need to get money, right? And they do
mm,
that by hiking taxes in this particular
yeah,
case. My fundamental problem is, as a so-called liberal organization, the DA needs to cut the budget of things that the city is not supposed to do, right? But they
mm,
never cut budgets. They only increase taxation all the time. And
yeah,
this is a huge problem philosophically for me, but also it's a terrible thing in the midst of an economic crisis in South Africa to make private schools pay business rates, which are 8 times more than school rates, unilaterally overnight without explaining anything. It's just a terrible
yeah.
look optically, and I think it's a terrible thing that the DA refuses to cut any budgets whatsoever.
Yeah, but I think the same thing happened where they ended up having all these protests in Johannesburg, didn't they? They just cut everybody's free electricity overnight. They were like, well, the ANC should have done it 2 years ago, and we're just doing it now. Like, yeah, but you still need to prep people for it. And it was the fact that there was zero engagement. There was the fact that there was no kind of notice on it. It just kind of all got cut and it was done. like, look, I understand that, sometimes when you got cancer, you don't want to kind of, cancer spreads, so you can't have it keep spreading. There does come a day we just need to cut it out. And I suppose that's how the DA are trying to look at it. It's like a, why pull a bandage off your arm slowly when you can just rip it off and just get it over with? And that's I suppose the DA mentality. But the problem is, and it's one that we can't underestimate, is the tax base in South Africa is declining.
Yeah.
It is not growing. And so the reality is that when you get into power to fix things. I mean, what's the DA's tagline? The DA gets things done. So, yes, that's true. The DA does get things done and it wants to get things done, and nobody can dispute that. But there is no money to get things done. So your only option is, you've had an area that's been under ANC rule for a long time, it's driven out the majority of the taxpayers, means there isn't really a lot of revenue left to squeeze out of people. And then the small amount of people that are there have to end up kind of like paying the bill for everyone else. So it's a natural consequence that people are going to get taxed more. But I suppose, as you very rightly say, as a liberal organisation, they should be looking at tax reduction methods. And you
Yeah.
might say, well, as a once-off, this is a good way to generate cash. But Cape Town, I think, and I'm going to go on about that again. I think it is a good model for where these taxations occur. They don't disappear, man. They
No.
come through there as temporary measures and they stay.
So in this particular instance, right? So you got private schools in Soweto, for example, who used to get a bill for 7,000 rand for rates.
Mm-hmm.
Under the new rule, their bill is now 64,000 rand for rates. And this is a private school in Soweto. It's not like Hyde Park or some rich area.
Mm-hmm.
The thing is, DA voters, I would argue for the most part, send their kids to private schools, right? DA
Mm-hmm.
voters are middle class for the most part. DA voters are really worried about the economic downturn. They are feeling a lot of pressure on their income and their savings and their ability to spend. What are schools going to do when their rates increase 8 times in a month? Well, they need to generate their money somehow. Will they increase school
Yeah,
fees?
so
Will they decrease
schools are
budgets
going
somewhere
to increase
else?
school fees, etc. Yeah.
Exactly. So it seems like the DA, and we pick on the DA, it's the DA-led coalition, not the DA by itself. But they're not. I don't
Mm.
know how they are thinking this through, because they're impacting the very people that I suppose voted for them in the first place. And this government, this country needs the cold medicine. It needs the hard medicine. I get that. It needs austerity in some way, but not by making life a lot more difficult for the very people who voted for you.
Yeah, but this is why they lost some kind of support in the Western Cape. In the Western Cape, it was due to the tax increases. And it's funny because when the DA got into Johannesburg, they started mentioning one of the crazy policies which they have mentioned in the past in Cape Town, and that was around forcing people to register their solar systems with the municipality, and potentially charging them for that actual system to be there. And a lot of people are like, hang on, this isn't your jurisdiction. But again, the DA needs the taxes to fix the place. So if I take my own area as an example, I'm not going to tell you where I live, but you obviously know, and it is DA run, and I know the mayor of the city very well. Um, and he did mention to me, like, when he first became mayor, we've had him now for 2 terms, so I think he's on year 7 now. But the first term he got there, he was like, all of their budget not to fix the place, but to just fix things that shouldn't have been needed to be fixed. So he was like, municipal vehicles, they had to repair all of them. And he says the reason they were all in disrepair is because they never paid suppliers on time. So as a result, when the vehicle broke, they couldn't get a garage to take it in and fix it because everybody was like, but you're not going to pay us. We're going to send you the bill. You ain't going to pay us. So as a result, a lot of the garages in the location just basically said, no, forget it. If you got a problem, you fix it yourself. And obviously they didn't have the skills to do it. So you had quite a lot of vehicles that needed to be fixed, which cost a lot of money. Then you had to pay those people in advance. And because he had to pay those people in advance to do the work before it would get done, that meant that obviously he was at a revenue loss before he even began to do anything. So you couldn't even start to generate like further taxation or investment in the place because you weren't doing anything. You had spent money on stuff that you were hoping would get done. Once that was done, he obviously had to tar roads and the usual things. But again, because the suppliers were so used to not getting paid, all of them were now demanding cash in advance. And I think you could probably apply that now even to the DA municipality in your area. I know in Johannesburg, man, the infrastructure there must look like shit, and
Yeah, it is.
they probably never got paid. So as a result, they're having to generate like almost double the amount of taxes up front because they're going to have to pay suppliers in advance. Probably the same as like my area, right? I doubt it's going
Mm,
to be that much different.
yeah, it's just
And
the budget
that's
difference.
yeah. So I imagine that that's going to have a terrible impact on the way that they actually run the place. So for people like you or for me, we wouldn't necessarily see that, but what we would see is the hike in our amenities. The bills get more expensive, and in a country where the bills are going up anyway, specifically, let's look at the cost of petrol as a good example.
Yeah.
I worked out the other day, man. I think I'm spending per 6 week cycle. I worked it out in a 6 week cycle. I'm spending like 16,000 rand a month for per 6 week cycle on petrol, man. Like it's insane. Like it's
Yeah.
insane. So
Yeah. So I mean, the moral of the story, like we understand that you need to fix things. We understand that you need to do X, Y, Z. But at the same time, I mean, consult maybe that would be a good idea. And most importantly, like just don't nail the people that try to vote for you in the first place, because that's how you alienate them, for the most part. And making
yeah,
sure private education is more expensive is a very, very bad way to get people to vote for you the next time around. So you have to be very careful with how you
yeah.
are making the DA difference with your coalition and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, not a good look
And
for the DA. Terrible optics, terrible timing. I don't know what they're thinking.
and this is the only time, Juju, if you're watching, I doubt you are, but if you are watching, it's the only time you'll ever see us agree with you ever. This is the EFF's like number one gripe with the DA. Huh? Their number one gripe is they never consult. They just do this stuff, and they say that this always ends up having a negative consequence on the poor. And if you think about it, they're not wrong. Like Soweto is not, of course there are some kind of well-to-do areas in Soweto. We can't just say Soweto is a giant like township anymore. That's not how Soweto is these days. But there are some very poor locations in Soweto and some very underprivileged locations. And like, do you really want your domestic worker mum who's kind of trying to do the best for you now having your private school fees like bumped up just because of the ability to raise more taxes?
Yeah,
So when the EFF says this has negative consequences on the poor, it really does. It actually genuinely does. So I do have sympathy for what the EFF says, even though they're a bunch of scumbags.
there are a bunch of
But
scumbags. But
you know,
also, private schools are not just like your St. John's, right? There are a lot of low fee private schools that people are flocking to get away from state schools, and
correct,
these are not
correct,
like huge like cash driven schools. They're not making a profit. They're
no,
not. They're just trying to get by. They're trying to get the best education at the lowest price as possible. That's all, and that's for poor kids or for lower income kids.
correct.
Got a huge effect on those particular schools. The St. John's, they can raise their rates 5%, no one gives a shit. But for your small private school that is there to fulfill a specific purpose, might kill them one day. And it's as I said, just be careful with what you do, because the optics are just shocking.
And those optics will come back to bite you in the ass when somebody like realizes it, and then they want to kind of campaign against those optics, which is what happens.
Yeah, all the
So
time.
yeah, like I say, this is actually the EFF's optics, isn't it? It's like they never think about it. They just do things. They don't consult. It impacts the poor. That's how the EFF gets their support, and it's not wrong. They're actually smack bang on the money. I wish they weren't, but they are. So Helen, if you're watching, I know you sometimes watch. Like, you guys need to improve your optics a little bit on this. This isn't great.
Yeah, yeah, really, really, really. All right, everyone. Well, that's the video for today. Thank you for watching. See you in the next one.
Take it easy.